So, first of all, I want to say thank you for the honor of getting to speak here, and that IBM is really proud to be a platinum level sponsor for the ApacheCon. We've been involved with Apache pretty much since the very beginnings, and we're happy to continue that partnership. So, topic of my talk today is it's not about the license, and I'll get into why that is. But let's just start by sort of asserting that, I think maybe a couple of years ago there seemed to be this sense that open source won. This is the way that software is developed now, is through open source. And yet, in the 2 years since that time, what we've seen is an increasing trend for open source providers to change the license on their technology, their open source technology, to either make it sort of commercial, dual licensed, add the commons clause to it, or even to sort of do things like intermingle proprietary code with the open source code so that it makes it difficult to actually build it in a truly open source way. And so, I like to say there's been a great disturbance in the force, right? We're starting to see this trend. This trend is coming about because cloud vendors, probably maybe unfairly, are being stigmatized by sort of taking advantage of the fact that they can take open source right off of GitHub or wherever it happens to be hosted and deploy it and offer a service, and they don't have to contribute anything back. And so this is a reality, and I think those people that are running projects that are feeling that pressure, like, well, we're doing all this work, we're contributing all of this technology out there, and people aren't sort of giving back to the community. We're essentially enabling these other vendors to monetize something that we built. So my friend Steve OGrady from RedMonk, he seems to be sort of caught in this cycle of having to continually write about, oh, yeah, there's another new open source license that we have to concern ourselves with. And more recently, earlier this year, I think he's actually written up 3 stories this year on open source licensing. And this was in, I think, the second one that came out. And his point was basically commercial open source providers have increasingly turned to models that blur the lines of distinction between the open source part and the proprietary software in an attempt to access the strengths of both, with the higher probability that we'll end up with the weaknesses instead. And I think this is really very prescient of him to sort of highlight the fact that the attempt to try and sort of reclaim the mantle, say, no, but this is still mine, that sort of goes against the whole open source ethos of having something that's out there and available for people to fork it and take it and do whatever they want to do with it. Now, the reality of it is, though, is, as I mentioned, that it is true that there are some that are taking the software, hosting a service, monetizing that platform without contributing back. I think increasingly there's pressure coming to change that. But the reality from my perspective is the following: that technology leaders do more than just consume open source. They also give back. And I'm trying to sort of, with this chart, highlight the fact that IBM has been sort of, since the very beginnings of the open source movement, has been a sort of a primary player. Brian was just telling me about how he sort of recruited the initial IBMer to contribute back to HTTP back in the day. And hey, maybe you could fix some of these bugs in the AIX drivers, and maybe you could fix some of the bugs in the OS2 drivers, right? And of course that wasn't the beginning for IBM. We had actually been contributing to the Linux kernel prior to that, right? So, and in fact, IBM, way back in the very beginning, about 1998, when we indemnified users of IBM products that were using Linux on IBM hardware against some of the suits that were ongoing at the time. So we indemnified users, essentially making it okay for enterprises to use open source. So, and that started back with Linux. Of course, we were central to helping to establish the Apache Software Foundation. We're very proud of that. We were around also to help stand up the Eclipse Foundation and sort of seed it with a significant contribution of code at the time. Unheard of, really. I mean, everybody associates IBM with proprietary and mainframe and lock-in and stuff like that. But in fact, we've been trying to be as open as we possibly can. And I joined IBM basically with the mission to help make it even more open than what it was already doing. And then we helped stand up the Linux Foundation to sort of formalize the process of governance over not only the Linux kernel, but now over, what is it, about 90 projects, I think, collaborative initiatives? 100. Yeah, so I mean, it's really starting to grow. And you know, fast forward, right, to more recent times, and we've been focusing on things like Docker, trying to get Docker, the company, to take Docker, the software, and really make it truly openly governed. And this is going to be sort of where I'm going with a lot of this talk. We worked with Cloud Foundry and with the folks at Pivotal to bring Cloud Foundry under open governance. And I'll talk about why that is in a moment. We worked with the Node community to sort of heal the Node.js and IO.js schism, to bring those two camps together, form eventually the OpenJS Foundation, where now the project is flourishing, right? So IBM has sort of been around and trying to help build these communities, help them essentially learn how to be more than just one company's software that happens to have a nice license on it. Whoops. Wrong way. And IBM has also done a lot in terms of taking software that we've developed in-house and taking that out and making that open source. And that, of course, that in the very early days, I know I got my start in open standards and open source around XML. And so I was really pleased when IBM published Xerces and then Xamarin, right, to sort of satisfy the XML driver space. But we've done way more than that. So there's a number of different projects like OpenJ9, that's IBM's Java implementation. Open Liberty, which was previous to that, it was WebSphere and then WebSphere Liberty, but we've opened it up. We've made it a fully open source project, inviting others to come and collaborate with us on that, and contributed OpenJ9 into Eclipse. We've even taken, you know, sort of the more advanced cutting edge technology like Qiskit, which is our quantum computing SDK, and making that fully open source and inviting academics around the world to collaborate and contribute not only to the development of this sort of new world order around quantum computing, but to also leverage the ability of open hardware that we have available for people to use. Obviously, Eclipse, I mentioned that. Hyperledger Fabric, the project that Brian and I are currently working on over in the Linux Foundation, that was a major contribution that IBM had originally developed internally in our research and our software development team. And we put that out, we made that open source because we felt that if it's going to be successful, if we're going to have a blockchain platform that truly is successful, it has to transcend any one vendor, it has to be open source, and it has to be under open governance. It can't be just under the control of a single company. Apache Tori, Apache SystemML, a number of other projects, OpenWhisk, you know, where IBM basically took something that we had developed internally and said, you know what, this needs to be open source. And in many cases, we've taken these things to Apache, and we're very pleased with the results, obviously. So I've written a paper with Todd Moore, my colleague. We helped sort of shape the strategy from an open source perspective inside IBM to sort of give the perspective of, here's IBM's approach to open technology, primarily around open source, right? It used to be that IBM was very much involved in sort of helping to shape international standards, whether that's through ISO or organizations like the W3C or OASIS, the ITU, and so forth. But we've recognized, again, that open source really won. So having people sit around conference tables and developing prose that addresses a particular technology domain, and then having people go off and independently implement what it says in that spec can be very challenging. And then you still have the problem of how do you get interoperability if you have all these independent implementations. People sometimes they interpret the words a little bit differently. So we've really taken it upon ourselves to sort of say, our approach to open technology, yes, standards are important, but more importantly, we really need to focus on open source implementation so that we get common code base that we can all share, and that'll help drive interoperability, and that helps eliminate vendor lock-in. And again, in order to achieve that, we really need to focus on what we believe is important, and that's open governance. We have to be going out, and especially for projects that are sort of critical, they're strategic to an enterprise, those projects need to be on open governance. And I say that, what does open governance mean? Well, basically it means that there's no one single vendor that can just willy-nilly change the license on you at any time. Because that adds risk, right? If you're going to be consuming the open source, the risk is, well, they change the license, they're going to force some commercial terms on me, and now this offering that I have to start paying my VIG to to whoever controls that project. That's not too cool, so maybe I'm not going to go that way. And so you're actually limiting the ability for you to have a broad platform if you're going to try and sort of control it, right? You know, they always say, you know, if you love your kids, you let them do what they want. You let them free, right? And it's really the same with software. If you really want it to be successful, you have to let go. You have to let others come in and contribute to it. Oops, again, I'm going in the wrong direction here. And again, so, you know, from an open governance perspective, we found that it really does yield results, right? I mean, Apache started with one project. It was a foundation formed essentially to host a single project initially, but it has now blossomed, and what do we have now? Over 300 projects now, Sam? That's amazing. But how did that happen? Why did that happen? It happened because Apache provides not just the open governance, it's almost vendor neutral place, but that allows people to collaborate together. It allows them to sort of put aside their corporate hat and say, I'm just going to put on my collaborative hat, and I'm going to work even with somebody who maybe is competing directly with my company on even a technology that we may share. And it's important that we do that. It's important that we create environments where there can be a diversity of contributorship, where there's no one company that can sort of willy-nilly change what's going on with the license, or make technical decisions that adversely affect others, right? It really needs to be a situation where there's a broad, diverse community around the development of that software, and there's a broad and diverse community that can essentially help to make sure that that software is sustained over time. Again, additional risk. We've had situations where we had sort of single vendor software that was very popular, and where the company that was sponsoring it and doing most of the development decides one day, you know what, we're not going to do that anymore. See ya. And they just close shop. Now, it's open source, you can take the code, you can do whatever you'd like with it, but if they were doing almost all of the heavy lifting, that can present a problem for the community if they want to continue to develop and work with that software. And often that can be a death knell for a project. So again, reducing risk by broadening the community, making the contributorship diverse, not just from a company perspective, but also from an individual perspective, is really important. And so, we've found that Apache, the Linux Foundation, the same thing. It was initially established as a home for the development of the Linux kernel, but it has since blossomed, and now there's over 100 different collaborative initiatives within the Linux Foundation. And why is that? It's because it's a safe place to collaborate. It's a safe place where people can put aside their corporate interests and they can collaborate together in a diverse manner on open source. Same thing with Eclipse. Eclipse started as a place where we were going to develop a Java IDE framework, right? But now there's projects at Eclipse that have nothing to do with Java, they have nothing to do with IDEs. Again, why is that? How come it's been so successful that it now has like 400 projects at Eclipse? Well, the reason for that is because it's a safe place to collaborate, right? People can put aside, well, there's politics, yes, okay, but people can put aside their interests, and we've created a very diverse community that is sustaining the development of all these different projects over time, and that's the thing that matters. So, Apache obviously has, the community over code, sort of tenet. And I think that's fundamentally important. It is very important. In fact, there's something relevant to Brian and I today going on over in Hyperledger about this. And it really is important that we create diverse communities that are sort of helping to shepherd the direction of software development of whatever the project is or whatever the community is. You know, this is fundamentally important. It's more important than the software itself. It's the community that you have built around that that's really fundamentally important. And in order to achieve that, you need diversity, not just of corporate perspective, but again, as I mentioned, also individuals. And so this is why I'm really happy to announce today that IBM is offered to sponsor Outreachy at the promoter level on behalf of the ASF, which really mean what, and so who's familiar with Outreachy? I can't see any hands, but a few people, which is good. All right. But Outreachy, again, they offer the ability to have people have paid interns to work on free and open source software for a 3-month period. And so IBM is sponsoring 3 of those interns on behalf of the Apache Software Foundation. They can take advantage of that any time over the course of the next couple of years. And so, again, we're really proud to be able to do that. And that's really what we're all about here. We're really about helping to improve the diversity of software development in open source at communities like Apache. And finally, I'll just sort of give a pitch for some of the other talks that IBM is hosting here at ApacheCon. Here they are here, and then of course Sam is going to follow me, I think in another half an hour or so with the State of the Feather. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris.